Welcome to the Sleepy Historian. Tonight we are going to talk about Calico Jack. The year was 1682, and in the bustling port towns of England, the salt air carried stories of distant lands and untold riches across the Caribbean Sea. It was in this world of maritime adventure that John Rackham was born, though the exact location of his birth remains lost to history. What we do know is that he emerged from the working classes of England, likely somewhere along the coast, where the sound of creaking ships and crying gulls would have been his earliest lullabies. Young John grew up in an era when the line between legitimate seafaring and piracy was often blurred. The late 17th century was a time of constant naval warfare between European powers, and privateering commissions allowed captains to attack enemy ships with official sanction. For many sailors, the transition from privateer to outright pirate was a natural progression, especially when wars ended and legitimate employment became scarce. The England of John Rackham's youth was a nation in transformation. The Great Fire of London had devastated the capital just 16 years before his birth, and the city was still rebuilding itself into the modern metropolis it would become. Trade with the Americas was expanding rapidly, bringing wealth to merchants, but also creating opportunities for those willing to take what they wanted by force. The Royal Navy was growing stronger, but vast stretches of ocean remained lawless frontiers where a clever captain with a fast ship could make his fortune. As a boy, John would have heard tales of Henry Morgan's raids on Spanish settlements, of the wealth flowing from the sugar plantations of the Caribbean, and of the Spanish treasure fleets that carried silver from the mines of Peru back to Europe. These stories painted a picture of the New World as a place where a man could reinvent himself, where the rigid class structures of England mattered less than courage, cunning, and the ability to command loyalty from rough crews. The maritime tradition ran deep in English blood. For generations, English sailors had ventured forth to challenge Spanish dominance in the Americas. The defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588 had established England as a naval power, and by the time of John's birth, English ships were regular visitors to Caribbean waters. The island of Jamaica had been seized from Spain in 1655 and had become a base for English operations in the region. John's early years were spent in a world where the sea offered both opportunity and danger. Coastal communities lived by the rhythms of tide and weather, their prosperity tied to the safe return of ships laden with goods from distant ports. Young men growing up in such environments naturally looked to the sea for their future, whether as merchant sailors, naval officers, or something more adventurous. The transition from land to sea was rarely gentle. Maritime life in the late 17th century was harsh, dangerous, and often short. Ships were cramped, unsanitary, and vulnerable to storms, disease, and enemy action. Discipline was brutal, food was scarce and often spoiled, and medical care was primitive at best. Yet for those with few prospects on land, the sea represented freedom and the possibility of advancement based on merit rather than birth. John Rackham's path to the sea likely began in his teens, as was common for boys of his class and era. He may have started as a cabin boy or apprentice seaman, learning the basics of seamanship through hard experience. The skills required were numerous and demanding: navigation by sun and stars, the handling of complex sail and rigging systems, the maintenance of wooden ships in tropical climates, and the ability to work effectively as part of a crew under dangerous conditions. The Caribbean in the 1690s was a complex political and economic landscape. Spanish control, once absolute, was being challenged by English, French, and Dutch colonies. Each European power sought to expand its territory and trade while limiting the activities of its rivals. This competition created a volatile environment where alliances shifted frequently and conflict was constant. Pirates and privateers flourished in this atmosphere of uncertainty. Official commissions from colonial governors provided legal cover for attacks on enemy shipping, but the line between authorized warfare and outright piracy was often ignored. Successful captains attracted followers not through birth or appointment, but through their ability to capture prizes and distribute wealth among their crews. The economic incentives for piracy were substantial. A successful raid could yield more wealth than a common sailor might earn in years of legitimate employment. Spanish merchants' ships carried silver, gold, and valuable trade goods. Sugar, tobacco, and other plantation products moved constantly between islands and back to Europe. Even smaller vessels often carried enough valuable cargo to make an attack worthwhile. But piracy was not merely about individual enrichment. It represented an alternative social system that challenged the established order. Pirate crews operated according to democratic principles that were radical for their time. Captains were elected by their crews and could be deposed if they lost confidence. Loot was distributed according to agreed-upon shares, with common pirates receiving far more equitable treatment than they would aboard merchant or naval vessels. John Rackham came of age in this world of opportunity and danger. His early experiences at sea would have taught him not only the practical skills of seamanship, but also the political and social dynamics that governed life in the Caribbean. He learned to read the wind and weather, to handle a ship in rough seas, and to fight when necessary. More importantly, he learned how to lead men who followed him by choice rather than compulsion. The transformation from John Rackham, English sailor, to Calico Jack, pirate captain, was not a sudden event, but a gradual process shaped by circumstance, opportunity, and character. Each voyage brought new experiences and challenges. Each encounter with other ships, whether peaceful or hostile, added to his knowledge of Caribbean waters and their dangers. Each interaction with fellow sailors helped him develop the leadership skills that would eventually make him a captain. By the time John reached his 20s, he was an experienced seaman with a thorough knowledge of Caribbean navigation, weather patterns, and the complex political situation among the islands. He understood the economics of maritime trade, the weaknesses of various types of vessels, and the tactics necessary for successful attacks. Most importantly, he had developed the personal qualities that would allow him to command the loyalty of men whose lives depended on his judgment and skill. The transformation of John Rackham into the legendary Calico Jack began not with a dramatic moment of rebellion, but through the gradual accumulation of experience and reputation among the rough brotherhood of Caribbean mariners. By the early 1700s, Rackham had established himself as a capable and reliable sailor, the kind of man that captains sought for their crews, and that fellow sailors respected for his competence under pressure. His nickname, which would become as famous as any pirate name in history, derived from his distinctive taste in clothing. While most sailors of the era dressed in practical but plain garments, Rackham favored colorful cotton fabric known as calico. This material, originally imported from India, had become popular in European markets for its bright patterns and relatively affordable price. The fabric was practical for Caribbean conditions, being lighter and more breathable than wool, while the vivid colors and intricate designs satisfied a taste for display that set successful pirates apart from common seamen. Calico Jack's choice of clothing was more than mere vanity. In the hierarchical world of sailing ships, appearance served as a form of communication about status, success, and personality. A captain who could afford fine clothes demonstrated his ability to capture valuable prizes. Bright colors and unusual styles indicated a willingness to stand apart from conventional society. For a man whose leadership depended on inspiring confidence and loyalty in followers who chose to follow him, such visual symbols carried real importance. The early 18th century was a period of significant change in the Caribbean pirate community. The great captains of the previous generation, men like Henry Morgan and the French filibusters, had either died, retired, or been absorbed into legitimate colonial society. A new generation was emerging, and the political situation was shifting in ways that would both create opportunities and increase dangers for those who chose the pirate life. The War of Spanish Succession, which raged from 1701 to 1714, created ideal conditions for Caribbean piracy. European powers were focused on conflicts closer to home, leaving their distant colonies with reduced naval protection. Privateering commissions were readily available, providing legal cover for attacks on enemy shipping. The constant warfare disrupted normal trade patterns, creating shortages that made captured goods even more valuable. Calico Jack's rise during this period was facilitated by his association with established pirate captains who recognized his abilities. The Caribbean pirate community was surprisingly well organized, with informal networks that shared information about shipping movements, safe harbors, and colonial politics. Successful pirates maintained relationships with merchants willing to purchase stolen goods, colonial officials who could be bribed or intimidated, and tavern keepers who provided neutral meeting grounds. The island of New Providence in the Bahamas had emerged as the unofficial capital of Caribbean piracy. Its location made it an ideal base for intercepting ships traveling between the American colonies and Europe or the Caribbean islands. The harbor could accommodate dozens of vessels, while the town offered all the services that pirates required: shipyards for repairs, taverns for recreation, merchants for disposing of stolen goods, and a population that asked few questions about the source of anyone's wealth. It was in New Providence that Calico Jack first began to distinguish himself as more than just another capable sailor. The pirate community there operated according to its own rules and traditions, many of which differed dramatically from the rigid hierarchies of legitimate society. Captains were elected by their crews and held their positions only as long as they could maintain the confidence of their followers. Disputes were settled by vote or combat. Wealth was distributed according to agreed-upon articles that every crew member signed before sailing. This democratic system appealed to men like Rackham, who possessed natural leadership abilities, but lacked the social connections necessary for advancement in conventional careers. In the world of piracy, a man's worth was measured by his courage, skill, and ability to capture prizes. Birth and education mattered far less than they did on land, creating opportunities for social mobility that were rare in the early 18th century. Calico Jack's reputation grew through participation in successful raids and his fair treatment of crew members. Pirates were notoriously suspicious of leaders who claimed more than their fair share of booty, or who made decisions without consulting their followers. Rackham's willingness to follow established customs and his skill in planning and executing attacks earned him the respect of his peers. The practical aspects of pirate leadership were complex and demanding. A successful captain needed to be not only a skilled navigator and tactician, but also a diplomat, accountant, and judge. He had to maintain discipline without appearing tyrannical, distribute wealth fairly while retaining enough resources for ship maintenance and supplies, and make strategic decisions that balanced immediate gains against long-term survival. Calico Jack demonstrated particular skill in the political aspects of piracy. He understood the importance of maintaining good relationships with colonial officials who might be persuaded to overlook certain activities in exchange for appropriate compensation. He recognized the value of treating captured merchants and passengers with enough courtesy to encourage cooperation while still extracting maximum value from prizes. Most importantly, he grasped the necessity of keeping his crew satisfied and loyal in a profession where mutiny was always a possibility. The clothing that gave him his nickname also served practical purposes in establishing his authority and reputation. In encounters with other vessels, whether for trade, negotiation, or combat, a captain's appearance sent immediate messages about his success and capabilities. Calico Jack's colorful attire announced that he was prosperous enough to afford expensive fabrics, confident enough to stand out from the crowd, and successful enough to take risks that lesser men might avoid. The calico patterns themselves were often intricate and beautiful, featuring flowers, paisley designs, and geometric shapes in brilliant colors that seemed to capture the exotic nature of the Caribbean environment. These fabrics represented the global nature of 18th century trade, having been manufactured in India, shipped to Europe, and then transported to the Americas, where they adorned a pirate captain who preyed on the very trade routes that had brought them to the New World. As Calico Jack's reputation grew, so did the stories about his exploits. The pirate community was one where tales were told and retold, often growing in the telling. A successful captain became the subject of legends that enhanced his ability to inspire fear in enemies and loyalty in followers. The distinctive clothing and memorable nickname helped ensure that these stories remained attached to the man himself rather than becoming generic pirate lore. The years of building his reputation were also years of learning the complex geography and politics of the Caribbean. Every island had its own character, resources, and vulnerabilities. Some colonial governments were corrupt and easily bribed, others were efficient and hostile to piracy. Certain harbors offered safe anchorage and friendly populations. Others were well defended or unsuitable for the shallow draft vessels that pirates favored. Weather patterns, seasonal variations in trade routes, and the schedules of treasure fleets all had to be understood and incorporated into planning. The hurricane season made certain areas dangerous for several months each year. The arrival of new colonial governors or naval commanders could dramatically alter the risk profile of particular regions. Successful pirates like Calico Jack developed an encyclopedic knowledge of these factors and used them to maximum advantage. By the time he was ready to claim a captaincy of his own, Jack Rackham had transformed himself into Calico Jack, a figure who commanded respect throughout the Caribbean pirate community. His colorful clothing had become his trademark, but more importantly, he had developed the skills, knowledge, and reputation necessary to lead his own crew in one of the most dangerous and competitive professions of his era. The path from ordinary seaman to pirate captain was neither quick nor guaranteed, and Calico Jack's ascent through the informal hierarchy of Caribbean piracy required years of proving himself in increasingly responsible positions. The democratic nature of pirate society meant that advancement came through demonstrated competence and the ability to earn the trust of hard-bitten sailors who had little patience for incompetence or pretension. Rackham's early service aboard various pirate vessels provided him with a comprehensive education in all aspects of maritime predation. He learned to read the subtle signs that indicated a potential prize. The way a ship sat in the water that suggested valuable cargo, the quality of its rigging that revealed the owner's wealth, the behavior of its crew that might indicate their willingness to fight or surrender. These skills were essential for any pirate who hoped to survive and prosper in waters where poor judgment could lead to death or capture. The social structure aboard pirate ships was complex and constantly evolving. While captains held ultimate authority in matters of navigation and combat, major decisions were typically made by consensus or vote of the entire crew. This system created opportunities for ambitious men like Calico Jack to demonstrate leadership abilities and build the personal relationships necessary for eventual advancement to command positions. One of the key positions in any pirate crew was that of quartermaster, an officer responsible for maintaining discipline, settling disputes, and overseeing the distribution of food, water, and captured booty. The quartermaster was elected by the crew and often served as a check on the captain's authority, representing the interests of common pirates in dealings with their leaders. It was to this crucial position that Calico Jack was eventually elected, marking his emergence as a recognized leader within the pirate community. The role of quartermaster required a unique combination of skills and personal qualities. He needed to be completely trustworthy in financial matters, since pirates would only follow leaders they believed would give them their fair share of captured wealth. He had to be diplomatic enough to resolve conflicts between strong-willed men living in cramped conditions under constant stress. At the same time, he needed to be tough enough to enforce discipline when necessary and decisive enough to act quickly in dangerous situations. Calico Jack's success as a quartermaster demonstrated his mastery of these requirements. His reputation for fair dealing earned him the respect of his fellow pirates, while his willingness to enforce agreed-upon rules maintained order aboard ship. His growing expertise in Caribbean waters and colonial politics made him increasingly valuable to the captains under whom he served, and his natural charisma attracted the loyalty of ambitious sailors who saw him as a potential leader of their own future enterprises. The Caribbean of the early 1700s offered numerous opportunities for pirates willing to take calculated risks. Spanish treasure fleets still carried enormous wealth across the Atlantic, though they were better protected than in previous generations. Merchant vessels of all nations moved constantly between islands, carrying sugar, tobacco, rum, manufactured goods, and slaves. Even small coastal traders often carried enough valuable cargo to justify the risks involved in capturing them. Calico Jack's experience during this period taught him to balance aggression with pragmatism. Successful piracy required careful planning, accurate intelligence about potential targets, and the ability to strike quickly and decisively when opportunities presented themselves. It also demanded restraint, since excessive violence could provoke colonial governments into more vigorous anti-piracy efforts, while attacking the wrong targets could eliminate valuable sources of information or supplies. The intelligence networks that supported Caribbean piracy were extensive and sophisticated. Tavern keepers, merchants, sailors, dock workers, and even colonial officials provided information about ship movements, cargo manifests, and defensive preparations. This information was bought, bartered, or extracted through intimidation, creating a web of relationships that extended throughout the region. Quartermaster Rackham became adept at managing these relationships and extracting maximum value from the intelligence they provided. Navigation in Caribbean waters required skills that went far beyond simple seamanship. The region was filled with reefs, shoals, and small islands that could provide refuge for pirates, but doom for those unfamiliar with local conditions. Seasonal weather patterns, ocean currents, and tidal variations all affected the movement of ships and the success of pirate operations. Calico Jack studied these factors carefully, developing the expertise that would later make him one of the most successful captains of his era. The weapons and tactics of early 18th century piracy were also evolving during Rackham's apprenticeship years. Firearms were becoming more reliable and effective, changing the dynamics of ship-to-ship combat. Cannon were lighter and more accurate, though still limited by the technology of the time. Boarding actions remained the preferred method for capturing vessels, requiring pirates to maintain their skills with cutlass, pistol, and musket, while developing new techniques for overcoming improved defenses. Calico Jack's distinctive clothing became even more elaborate during his years as quartermaster, reflecting both his growing success and his understanding of the psychological aspects of piracy. The bright calico fabrics he favored were often complemented by silk scarves, gold jewelry, and well-crafted weapons that proclaimed his status within the pirate hierarchy. This attention to appearance was not mere vanity, but a calculated strategy for projecting authority and inspiring confidence among his followers. The bonds formed between pirates during successful voyages were often stronger than blood relationships. Men who had faced death together, shared hardships and dangers, and trusted each other with their lives, developed loyalties that transcended ordinary social distinctions. Calico Jack's ability to inspire such loyalty among his shipmates was evident in the growing number of experienced pirates who expressed willingness to follow him when he eventually claimed a captaincy of his own. The process of becoming a pirate captain involved more than simply declaring oneself ready for command. The pirate community had informal but well-understood procedures for recognizing new leaders. A potential captain needed to demonstrate his qualifications through successful service in subordinate positions, gather a sufficient number of followers committed to sailing under his command, and obtain a suitable vessel for his operations. Most importantly, he needed to be accepted by the community of established captains who controlled the most profitable hunting grounds and safe harbors. Calico Jack's reputation as a fair and competent quartermaster provided the foundation for his eventual advancement. But the opportunity for independent command came through his association with established pirate leaders who recognized his potential. The Caribbean pirate community was surprisingly collegial, with successful captains often cooperating on major ventures or providing support and advice to promising newcomers. This network of relationships would prove crucial when Rackham finally made his bid for an independent command. By the time he was ready to claim a captaincy, Calico Jack had accumulated years of experience in every aspect of pirate operations. He understood the practical details of ship handling, combat, and navigation. He had mastered the political and economic aspects of piracy, learning how to gather intelligence, dispose of stolen goods, and maintain relationships with the complex network of supporters who made pirate operations possible. Most importantly, he had developed the leadership skills necessary to command the loyalty of men whose lives would depend on his judgment and courage. The transformation from John Rackham, English sailor, to Calico Jack, pirate quartermaster, represented more than a change in profession. It marked his evolution into a leader who could navigate the dangerous waters of Caribbean politics and maritime warfare while maintaining the delicate balance of authority and consultation that made pirate society function. He was now ready to take the next step in his remarkable career. The opportunity that would transform Calico Jack from quartermaster to captain came in the form of a modest sloop named William, anchored peacefully in Nassau Harbor during the winter of 1718. This vessel, unremarkable in most respects, would become the foundation of Rackham's independent career as a pirate captain and the stage for some of the most famous adventures in the annals of Caribbean piracy. The William was typical of the small vessels that dominated inter-island trade in the early 18th century Caribbean. Perhaps 60 feet in length with a single mast and fore and aft rigged sails, she was designed for speed and maneuverability rather than cargo capacity or defensive strength. Such vessels were ideal for the hit-and-run tactics that had become standard practice among Caribbean pirates, being able to slip into shallow harbors where larger ships could not follow and outrun naval vessels in favorable conditions. The capture of the William involved no dramatic battle or desperate struggle. Instead, it was accomplished through a combination of careful planning, inside knowledge, and the kind of coordinated action that demonstrated Calico Jack's growing skills as a leader. The vessel's small crew was overwhelmed before they could offer significant resistance, and the ship itself was taken without damage that would impair its usefulness for pirate operations. This bloodless capture reflected the sophisticated approach that distinguished successful pirates from mere brigands. Rackham understood that damaged ships and wounded crews were liabilities rather than assets. A vessel that required extensive repairs consumed time and resources that could be better employed in capturing additional prizes. Crews that had been brutalized were likely to resist cooperation and might carry tales that would make future victims more determined to fight rather than surrender. The Williams design made her particularly suitable for the type of piracy that Calico Jack intended to practice. Her shallow draft allowed access to secluded anchorages where larger naval vessels could not pursue. Her speed under sail made it possible to overtake merchant vessels or escape from superior forces as circumstances required. Her modest size meant that she could be operated by a relatively small crew, making it easier to maintain discipline and distribute captured wealth among a manageable number of followers. Rackham's first task as the new captain of the William was to recruit a crew that would serve him loyally and effectively. This process required all of his accumulated knowledge of pirate society and his skills in judging character. He needed experienced sailors who could handle the vessel in all weather conditions, fighters who would stand firm in combat, and men whose personal loyalty would prevent mutiny during difficult periods. The crew that assembled aboard the William reflected the diverse nature of Caribbean piracy. They came from various national backgrounds, included men of different races and social origins, and represented a range of experience levels from grizzled veterans to young sailors seeking their fortunes. What united them was their willingness to follow Calico Jack in his pursuit of prizes and their agreement to abide by the articles of conduct that governed their shared enterprise. These articles, similar to those used by pirate crews throughout the Caribbean, established the democratic principles and practical arrangements that made pirate society function. They specified how captured wealth would be distributed, defined the duties and privileges of different crew members, established procedures for settling disputes, and outlined the punishments for various offenses. Most importantly, they affirmed the crew's right to elect and depose their captain, ensuring that Rackham's authority depended on his continued success and fair treatment of his followers. The William's first voyages under Calico Jack's command were deliberately modest in scope, designed to test the crew's effectiveness and build the reputation of the new partnership. Rather than attempting ambitious attacks on well-defended targets, Rackham chose smaller merchant vessels that could be captured with minimal risk and reasonable certainty of success. These early prizes provided the crew with confidence in their captain's judgment and enough wealth to confirm the wisdom of their decision to follow him. The practical aspects of operating a pirate vessel required constant attention to detail and careful management of limited resources. Fresh water and food had to be obtained regularly, either through purchase in friendly ports or by raiding coastal settlements. The ship's rigging and sails required frequent maintenance in the harsh Caribbean environment. Weapons needed to be kept clean and ready for use, while the vessel's hull required periodic cleaning and repair to prevent damage from marine borers and coral. Calico Jack's background as a quartermaster served him well in managing these responsibilities. He understood the importance of maintaining his crew's morale through fair treatment and adequate supplies. He recognized that a well-maintained ship was essential for both successful attacks and emergency escapes. Most importantly, he grasped the necessity of balancing immediate needs against long-term planning, ensuring that the William remained operational while also accumulating the resources necessary for larger ventures. The Caribbean waters where the William operated were vast and complex, offering countless opportunities for both profit and disaster. Island chains created maze-like passages where local knowledge provided enormous advantages. Ocean currents and wind patterns changed seasonally, affecting both the movement of merchant shipping and the tactics available to pirates. Colonial politics shifted constantly, creating safe harbors in some locations while increasing dangers in others. Calico Jack's growing expertise in these matters was demonstrated by his ability to keep the William operational and profitable while avoiding the naval patrols and colonial militias that posed constant threats to pirate vessels. He developed an extensive network of informants who provided intelligence about shipping movements and government activities. He established relationships with merchants willing to purchase stolen goods and tavern keepers who offered secure meeting places for planning future operations. The success of the William under Rackham's command attracted attention throughout the Caribbean pirate community. Other captains took note of his tactical innovations and fair treatment of crew members. Colonial governments began to recognize his name and the threat posed by his vessel. Most importantly, ambitious pirates began to seek positions aboard the William, drawn by reports of successful captures and equitable distribution of profits. This growing reputation brought both opportunities and challenges. Larger and more valuable prizes became accessible as merchants and colonial officials learned to fear the William's approach. At the same time, increased attention from naval forces and colonial militias made operations more dangerous and required greater caution in selecting targets and planning attacks. The William's success under Calico Jack also demonstrated the effectiveness of his leadership style, which combined decisive command with consultation and respect for his crew's opinions. Unlike captains who ruled through fear and intimidation, Rackham built loyalty through competence, fairness, and shared success. His willingness to listen to advice and his recognition of other men's contributions created a cooperative atmosphere that enhanced the vessel's effectiveness in all aspects of pirate operations. The transformation of the William from peaceful trading vessel to feared pirate ship paralleled Calico Jack's own evolution from promising quartermaster to successful captain. The modest sloop became the platform from which he would launch the career that would make him one of the most famous pirates of his era. More importantly, the William provided Rackham with the independence and authority necessary to pursue the ambitious plans that would define his place in Caribbean history. As winter turned to spring in 1719, the William sailed confidently through waters that were becoming increasingly familiar to her captain and crew. The vessel that had been captured through careful planning and coordinated action had become the foundation of a growing reputation that would soon attract the attention of individuals whose names would become forever linked with that of Calico Jack. The spring of 1719 brought to Nassau Harbour a young woman whose presence would alter the course of Calico Jack's career and secure both their names in the annals of pirate history. Anne Bonny arrived in the Bahamas as the wife of James Bonny, a small-time pirate and sometime informant whose lack of ambition and courage had earned him the contempt of his more successful colleagues. Anne herself was a remarkable figure, even by the standards of the Caribbean's diverse and unconventional society. Born Anne Cormac in County Cork, Ireland, around 1697, she had come to the Americas as a child when her father, a successful lawyer, relocated his family to Charleston, South Carolina. Her early life had been marked by comfort and education unusual for women of her era, but also by a fiery temperament that would prove both her greatest strength and her most dangerous weakness. The circumstances that brought Anne Bonny to Nassau were typical of the complex personal dramas that played out in Caribbean ports. Her marriage to James Bonny had been a rebellion against her father's authority and conventional society's expectations, but it had quickly soured when her husband proved to be weak, unambitious, and willing to betray his fellow pirates for small rewards from colonial authorities. Calico Jack first encountered Anne in one of Nassau's numerous taverns, establishments that served as informal headquarters for the pirate community and neutral ground where crews could meet, exchange information, and negotiate future ventures. The attraction between them was immediate and powerful, transcending the usual distinctions of class, nationality, and profession that might have kept them apart in more conventional circumstances. Anne Bonny was not simply another tavern companion seeking temporary association with a successful pirate captain. She possessed intelligence, courage, and determination that matched Rackham's own qualities, along with a fierce independence that had already brought her into conflict with conventional society. Her decision to abandon her husband and join Calico Jack represented more than romantic attraction. It was a choice to embrace the freedom and danger of pirate life rather than accept the limitations imposed on women in colonial society. The relationship between Anne and Calico Jack developed against the vibrant backdrop of Nassau in its golden age of piracy. The town had become a haven for hundreds of pirates, their crews, and the merchants, innkeepers, and craftsmen who served their needs. Ships of all sizes filled the harbour, from small sloops like the William to captured Spanish galleons converted for pirate use. The streets buzzed with activity as crews prepared for voyages, celebrated successful returns, or negotiated the complex business arrangements that supported pirate operations. This environment provided Anne with opportunities to observe pirate society firsthand and to understand the skills and knowledge necessary for success in this dangerous profession. She learned to handle firearms and edged weapons, skills that women of her social background would never have acquired in conventional circumstances. More importantly, she studied the tactics, politics, and economics of piracy, developing expertise that would make her a valuable partner in Calico Jack's future enterprises. The presence of women in pirate society was unusual but not unprecedented. The democratic and unconventional nature of pirate communities created opportunities for individuals to transcend traditional social roles based on merit and contribution, rather than birth or gender. However, Anne's situation was complicated by her relationship with Calico Jack, which created potential conflicts between personal loyalty and professional effectiveness that would eventually prove problematic. Rackham's decision to accept Anne as more than a casual companion demonstrated both his recognition of her exceptional qualities and his willingness to challenge conventional expectations. Few pirate captains would have risked the complications inherent in maintaining a romantic relationship with someone who also sought to participate actively in pirate operations. The potential for jealousy, favoritism, and divided loyalties could have destroyed crew morale and undermined the captain's authority. The integration of Anne Bonny into the Williams operations required careful management of crew relationships and clear establishment of her role and responsibilities. She could not simply be treated as a passenger or ornamental companion, since such status would have undermined both her own capabilities and the egalitarian principles that governed pirate society. At the same time, any appearance of favoritism or special treatment could have provoked resentment among crew members whose loyalty was essential to the vessel's success. Calico Jack's solution was to allow Anne to prove herself through demonstrated competence and courage, the same standards applied to any other member of the crew. Her intelligence and education made her valuable in planning operations and managing the complex negotiations involved in disposing of captured goods. Her growing expertise with weapons and tactics qualified her to participate in actual combat when circumstances required. Most importantly, her fierce loyalty to Rackham and commitment to pirate principles earned the respect of crew members who might have been skeptical of her presence. The relationship between Anne and Calico Jack also reflected the broader social dynamics of Caribbean pirate society. The communities that supported piracy were remarkably diverse and tolerant by the standards of their era, including individuals of various races, nationalities, and social backgrounds who might have had little interaction in more conventional settings. This diversity was both a source of strength, providing access to different skills and knowledge, and a potential weakness, since cultural differences could create conflicts that threatened group cohesion. Anne's presence aboard the William attracted attention throughout the Caribbean pirate community. Her beauty, intelligence, and unconventional lifestyle made her a subject of conversation and speculation wherever pirates gathered. Stories about her relationship with Calico Jack and her participation in pirate operations spread throughout the region, adding to the growing legend surrounding both individuals. This attention had practical implications for the Williams operations. Colonial authorities took special interest in vessels known to carry women pirates, seeing them as particularly scandalous violations of proper order that required vigorous suppression. Naval patrols increased their efforts to capture ships associated with Anne Bonny, viewing her as a symbol of pirate defiance that could not be tolerated. At the same time, her reputation attracted ambitious pirates seeking to join the crew of a captain bold enough to challenge social conventions while maintaining his success. The partnership between Anne and Calico Jack during this period was characterized by mutual respect, shared danger, and common commitment to the pirate life they had chosen. Their relationship transcended simple romance to become a genuine alliance between equals who complemented each other's strengths and compensated for each other's weaknesses. This partnership would soon be tested by events that would challenge their loyalty to each other and their commitment to the dangerous profession they had embraced. The spring and summer of 1719 passed in a series of successful cruises that established the William as one of the most effective pirate vessels in Caribbean waters. Anne's presence aboard the ship became accepted as natural by the crew, while her contributions to the vessel's success eliminated any lingering doubts about the wisdom of Calico Jack's decision to include her in their operations. The stage was set for the next chapter in their remarkable story. In the autumn of 1720, fate brought to the William another remarkable woman whose story would become inextricably linked with those of Calico Jack and Anne Bonny. Mary Read arrived as part of a prize crew from a captured vessel, disguised as a young man and maintaining an identity that had protected her throughout years of maritime adventure in both legitimate and illegitimate service. Mary's background was even more extraordinary than Anne's, though it would remain largely hidden until circumstances forced revelation of her true identity. Born in England around 1695, she had been raised as a boy by her mother, who sought to claim financial support from Mary's deceased half-brother's paternal grandfather. This unusual upbringing had provided Mary with freedoms and opportunities unavailable to most women of her era, while also creating a complex identity that she would maintain throughout her adult life. Unlike Anne Bonny, whose entry into pirate society had been a deliberate choice motivated by rebellion against conventional expectations, Mary Read's path to the William was the result of circumstances and survival rather than planned rebellion. She had served aboard various vessels as a sailor, maintaining her masculine disguise with such effectiveness that even experienced mariners accepted her as a young man somewhat unusual in appearance, but competent in seamanship and courage. The captured vessel from which Mary joined Calico Jack's crew had been taken in a typical pirate action, a swift assault that overwhelmed the merchant crew before they could mount effective resistance. Mary had been serving aboard the merchant vessel as an ordinary seaman, her true identity known only to herself and protected by years of careful practice in masculine behavior and appearance. The initial interaction between Mary and the pirates who captured her vessel followed established patterns for such encounters. Merchant sailors, faced with overwhelming force, typically had three options: resistance that would likely result in death or serious injury, surrender followed by imprisonment or abandonment on some remote shore, or voluntary enlistment in the pirate crew that had captured them. Mary's choice to join Calico Jack's crew appeared to be simple pragmatism, a decision motivated by survival rather than enthusiasm for pirate life. Calico Jack's acceptance of Mary as a new crew member reflected his growing confidence as a captain and his practical approach to manning his vessel. Experienced sailors were always in demand, and a young man with demonstrated competence and courage was a valuable addition to any pirate crew. Mary's quiet demeanor and obvious skills made her integration into the William's operations smooth and unremarkable, at least initially. The presence of two women aboard the William, one openly acknowledged and the other maintaining an elaborate disguise, created a unique dynamic that would have far-reaching consequences for all involved. Anne Bonny's position as Calico Jack's acknowledged partner was well established, but Mary's hidden identity added complexity to relationships aboard the crowded vessel. The situation was further complicated by Anne's growing attraction to the mysterious young sailor who had joined their crew. Mary Read's ability to maintain her masculine disguise while living in close quarters with an experienced crew demonstrated remarkable skill and determination. Life aboard an 18th-century sailing vessel offered little privacy, and the normal routines of eating, sleeping, and working required constant vigilance to prevent discovery. Mary's years of practice had made such deception almost instinctive, but the emotional pressures of her new situation would eventually strain even her considerable abilities. Anne Bonny's interest in Mary developed gradually, beginning with professional respect for the newcomer's competence and courage, and evolving into personal attraction that complicated her relationship with Calico Jack. The confined environment of the William made such feelings difficult to conceal, and the resulting tensions threatened to disrupt the careful balance of relationships that maintained crew cohesion and effectiveness. The eventual revelation of Mary's true identity came not through careless exposure, but through Anne's growing suspicions and persistent curiosity. The two women's private conversation, conducted in circumstances that ensured secrecy from the rest of the crew, marked a turning point in the dynamics aboard the William. Anne's discovery that the attractive young sailor was actually a woman transformed potential romantic rivalry into something more complex and ultimately more dangerous. Mary's decision to reveal her secret to Anne reflected both the impossibility of maintaining the deception indefinitely and her recognition that Anne could be trusted with knowledge that could mean death if revealed to hostile authorities. The bond that developed between the two women transcended simple friendship to become a partnership based on shared danger, mutual respect, and common commitment to the unconventional life they had chosen. Calico Jack's reaction to learning of Mary's true identity demonstrated his flexibility and pragmatic approach to leadership. Rather than viewing the situation as a problem or betrayal, he recognized Mary's exceptional qualities and the potential advantages of having two such remarkable women as part of his crew. His decision to accept and protect Mary's continued presence aboard the William reflected both his growing confidence as a captain and his understanding of the unique circumstances that had brought them together. The integration of Mary into the inner circle of the William's leadership required careful management to prevent jealousy or resentment among other crew members. Her competence and courage had already earned respect, but the revelation of her gender could have created complications if handled poorly. Calico Jack's solution was to maintain Mary's masculine disguise for most practical purposes, while acknowledging her true identity only within the small group that needed to know. This arrangement worked effectively because it built upon relationships and respect that had already been established through demonstrated performance rather than revealed identity. Mary's value to the crew was based on her skills as a sailor and fighter, not on her gender, and maintaining that focus helped prevent the disruptions that might have otherwise resulted from the unusual situation. The autumn and winter of 1720 saw the William operating with increased effectiveness as the partnership between Calico Jack, Bonny, and Mary Read reached full development. The three leaders complemented each other's strengths and compensated for individual weaknesses, creating a command structure that was both efficient and flexible. Their shared commitment to pirate principles and mutual loyalty provided a foundation for the ambitious operations that would define their place in history. Mary's contribution to the Williams' success extended beyond her individual skills to include the unique perspective she brought to planning and executing operations. Her experience in legitimate maritime service provided insights into merchant vessel operations and defensive capabilities that proved valuable in selecting targets and developing tactics. Her ability to move freely in ports while maintaining her masculine disguise made her an effective intelligence gatherer and negotiator. The psychological impact of having two formidable women as part of the crew also enhanced the Williams' reputation throughout the Caribbean. Stories about Bonny and Mary Read spread rapidly through the pirate community and colonial society, creating a legend that was both attractive to potential recruits and intimidating to potential victims. The unusual nature of their partnership with Calico Jack captured imaginations and generated tales that grew with each telling. But this growing notoriety also attracted increased attention from colonial authorities and naval forces determined to suppress piracy. The presence of women pirates was seen as particularly scandalous and threatening to established order, requiring vigorous response from officials responsible for maintaining law and order in the Caribbean colonies. The stage was being set for confrontations that would test the courage and loyalty of all three partners. The winter months of 1720 passed peacefully enough, with the William successfully evading naval patrols while capturing several valuable prizes. The crew's confidence in their leaders was at its highest point, and morale remained excellent despite the increasing dangers posed by more aggressive anti-piracy efforts. The partnership between Calico Jack, Bonny, and Mary Read had proven its effectiveness through months of successful operations and shared dangers. As 1721 began, the William sailed confidently through waters that had become as familiar as home to her crew. The three remarkable individuals who shared command of the vessel had created something unique in the annals of Caribbean piracy, a partnership based on mutual respect, shared courage, and common commitment to the dangerous but exciting life they had chosen. Their greatest adventures and their greatest challenges still lay ahead. The early months of 1721 marked the pinnacle of Calico Jack's career as a pirate captain, a period when the William and her extraordinary crew dominated the shipping lanes of the Caribbean with an effectiveness that would become legendary. The partnership between Rackham, Bonny, and Mary Read had evolved into a formidable command structure that combined tactical innovation with psychological warfare to achieve successes that exceeded even their own ambitious expectations. The Caribbean of 1721 presented both unprecedented opportunities and increasing dangers for pirate operations. Colonial trade had expanded dramatically since the end of the War of Spanish Succession, creating more targets for ambitious pirates willing to take calculated risks. At the same time, colonial governments were becoming more organized and determined in their anti-piracy efforts, supported by naval forces that were growing in both size and competence. Calico Jack's approach to this changing environment demonstrated the strategic thinking that distinguished successful pirate leaders from mere raiders. Rather than simply attacking whatever targets presented themselves, he developed systematic methods for gathering intelligence, selecting priorities, and executing operations with maximum efficiency and minimum risk. The Williams cruises became carefully planned expeditions that anticipated and prepared for various contingencies. The intelligence network that supported these operations was extensive and sophisticated, involving contacts throughout the Caribbean who provided information about shipping movements, cargo manifests, and defensive preparations. Tavern keepers, dock workers, merchants, and even colonial officials contributed intelligence in exchange for gold, goods, or protection from pirate attacks. This network gave Calico Jack advance warning of valuable targets and helped him avoid areas where naval patrols or colonial militias posed unacceptable risks. Anne Bonny and Mary Read played crucial roles in developing and maintaining these intelligence sources. Anne's beauty and charm made her effective in extracting information from merchants and officials who might be suspicious of obvious pirates. Mary's ability to move freely while maintaining her masculine disguise allowed her to gather intelligence in locations where women would not be welcome and where known associates of pirates would be immediately recognized. The tactical innovations developed by the Williams crew during this period reflected their leaders' understanding of both traditional pirate methods and the changing nature of Caribbean maritime warfare. Rather than relying solely on superior numbers or firepower, they emphasized speed, surprise, and psychological pressure to overcome resistance while minimizing casualties and damage to captured vessels. One of their most effective techniques involved the use of false flags and deceptive signals to approach potential victims without arousing suspicion. The William could fly the colors of various nations and had acquired the proper signal books and recognition codes that allowed her to pass for a legitimate vessel until the moment of attack. This deception often enabled them to get close enough to merchant ships to prevent escape or organized resistance. The boarding tactics employed by Calico Jack's crew were designed to overwhelm opposition quickly while preserving both the captured vessel and its cargo. Rather than the wild charges favored by less disciplined pirates, they used coordinated assaults that targeted key positions on enemy ships and isolated defenders before they could mount effective counterattacks. Anne and Mary's participation in these actions added an element of shock that often paralyzed resistance before it could begin. The psychological impact of the Williams' reputation had become almost as important as their actual fighting capability. Stories about Calico Jack's colorful clothing, Anne Bonny's fierce beauty, and Mary Read's mysterious identity created a legend that preceded them throughout the Caribbean. Merchant captains who recognized their approach often surrendered without resistance, knowing that cooperation was more likely to result in survival than futile defiance. This growing reputation also influenced the behavior of other pirate crews who sought to emulate the William's success or establish relationships that might provide mutual benefits. Calico Jack's status within the pirate community continued to rise, making him a leader whose opinions carried weight in the informal councils that coordinated large-scale operations and resolved disputes between competing crews. The distribution of captured wealth during this period followed traditional pirate customs, but was managed with unusual fairness and efficiency. Calico Jack's background as a quartermaster had taught him the importance of maintaining crew morale through equitable treatment, and he ensured that every member of the William's crew received shares proportionate to their rank and contribution. This policy attracted ambitious sailors from other vessels and maintained the loyalty of his existing followers. The variety of prizes taken by the William during 1721 reflected the diversity of Caribbean commerce and the sophistication of Calico Jack's target selection. Spanish merchant vessels carrying silver from South American mines provided the most spectacular single captures, but steady income came from smaller traders moving sugar, tobacco, manufactured goods, and slaves between islands. Each type of cargo required different handling and disposal methods, creating logistical challenges that tested the crew's adaptability. The sale and disposal of captured goods involved complex negotiations with merchants throughout the Caribbean who were willing to purchase stolen merchandise in exchange for gold, supplies, or services. These relationships required careful cultivation and protection, since exposure of sympathetic merchants could eliminate crucial sources of support. Calico Jack's diplomatic skills and reputation for fair dealing made him particularly effective in maintaining these essential business relationships. The William's operational range during this period extended throughout the Caribbean, from the Bahamas in the north to the coast of South America in the south. This mobility was essential for avoiding naval patrols and colonial militias while taking advantage of seasonal variations in trade routes and weather patterns. The crew's growing expertise in Caribbean navigation and local conditions enabled them to exploit opportunities that less knowledgeable pirates might miss. The seasonal hurricane patterns that dominated Caribbean weather between June and November created both opportunities and constraints for pirate operations. Merchant shipping was reduced during storm season, but naval patrols were also less active, creating windows of opportunity for well-planned operations. Calico Jack's understanding of these patterns allowed him to position the William for maximum effectiveness, while minimizing exposure to both natural and human dangers. The relationship between the three leaders of the William continued to evolve during this period of peak success. The professional partnership that had developed between Calico Jack, Bonny, and Mary Read was based on mutual respect and complementary skills rather than simple personal loyalty. Each brought unique capabilities to their shared enterprise, and their combined effectiveness exceeded what any of them might have achieved individually. Anne's role extended beyond combat participation to include strategic planning and crew management. Her intelligence and education made her valuable in analyzing potential targets and developing long-term operational plans. Her fierce loyalty to Calico Jack and the crew provided stability during difficult periods, while her willingness to share dangers and hardships earned respect that transcended gender boundaries. Mary's contributions were equally important, but more subtle, reflecting her need to maintain the masculine disguise that protected her from legal consequences that would be even more severe for a woman pirate than for her male colleagues. Her experience in legitimate maritime service provided insights into merchant vessel operations and defensive capabilities that improved the William's tactical effectiveness. Her courage in combat and competence in seamanship established her position within the crew's hierarchy. The summer of 1721 brought the William to the height of her success, with a series of captures that provided enormous wealth while demonstrating the crew's growing expertise and confidence. The partnership between the three leaders had reached full maturity, creating a command structure that was both efficient and flexible. Their reputation throughout the Caribbean was at its peak, inspiring both admiration and fear among those who encountered them. But this period of triumph also contained the seeds of future tragedy. The very success that had made Calico Jack, Anne Bonny, and Mary Read legendary figures also attracted the determined attention of colonial authorities who could no longer tolerate their depredations. Naval forces throughout the Caribbean were being strengthened and coordinated specifically to address the threat posed by the William and her remarkable crew. The golden age of their partnership was approaching its end, though none of them yet realized that their greatest challenges lay just ahead. As autumn arrived in 1721, the Caribbean had become an increasingly dangerous place for pirates, and Calico Jack found himself navigating waters where colonial governments and naval forces were coordinating their efforts with unprecedented effectiveness. The very success that had made the William legendary also made her crew targets of a determined campaign to eliminate piracy from Caribbean waters once and for all. The transformation of colonial attitudes toward piracy reflected broader changes in the political and economic landscape of the early 18th century. The major European powers had largely concluded their maritime conflicts, reducing the demand for privateers while increasing the resources available for anti-piracy operations. Colonial governments that had previously tolerated or even encouraged pirate activities now faced pressure from London, Paris, and Madrid to suppress the lawlessness that interfered with legitimate trade. Governor Woodes Rogers of the Bahamas had emerged as the most effective anti-piracy leader in the region, combining naval expertise with administrative skill to create a comprehensive strategy for eliminating pirate strongholds. His success in transforming Nassau from a pirate haven into a legitimate colonial port had demonstrated that determined officials with adequate resources could indeed suppress even well-established pirate communities. The intelligence networks that had previously served pirates were being systematically dismantled or turned against their former clients. Merchants who had once purchased stolen goods now faced severe penalties for such transactions. Tavern keepers and dock workers found themselves under surveillance by colonial authorities seeking to identify and capture pirate sympathizers. The web of relationships that had supported pirate operations for decades was rapidly deteriorating under official pressure. Calico Jack's response to these changing conditions demonstrated both his tactical flexibility and his growing understanding of the broader political situation. Rather than continuing the aggressive operations that had brought success during more permissive times, he began to modify the Williams' activities to reduce exposure while maintaining the crew's morale and financial needs. This shift required delicate balancing between caution and boldness, between survival and the expectations of followers who had joined him for adventure and wealth. The Williams' operational patterns during this period reflected these new constraints. Instead of remaining in well-traveled shipping lanes where valuable prizes were most likely to be found, Calico Jack began to focus on more remote areas where naval patrols were less frequent, but potential targets were correspondingly fewer and less valuable. This strategy reduced immediate risks while also decreasing the spectacular captures that had made his reputation. Naval pursuit tactics had also evolved to counter pirate innovations, creating cat-and-mouse games that tested the skills and endurance of both hunters and hunted. Royal Navy vessels were being stationed at strategic points throughout the Caribbean, creating networks of patrol areas that made it increasingly difficult for pirates to operate without detection. Improved communication between naval commanders allowed for coordinated responses that could trap unwary pirates in carefully planned operations. The psychological pressure of constant vigilance began to affect even the Williams' experienced crew. Men who had previously sailed with confidence now found themselves constantly watching the horizon for signs of pursuing vessels. Sleep became difficult when every strange sail might represent mortal danger. The relaxed camaraderie that had characterized earlier cruises was replaced by tension and suspicion that threatened crew cohesion. Bonny and Mary Read bore these pressures with characteristic courage, but the strain of maintaining their unusual positions while navigating increasingly dangerous waters was evident in their behavior and relationships. Anne's fierce temperament, which had been an asset during successful operations, became more volatile under stress. Mary's need to maintain her masculine disguise while dealing with the emotional pressures of their situation created additional complications that affected crew dynamics. The economic aspects of piracy were also becoming more difficult as legitimate merchants became increasingly reluctant to purchase stolen goods. The risk of prosecution for dealing with pirates had grown substantially, while colonial governments offered rewards for information leading to pirate captures. The network of sympathetic merchants that had provided essential services was contracting rapidly, forcing pirates to travel greater distances and accept lower prices for their captures. Intelligence gathering became both more important and more dangerous as colonial authorities increased their surveillance of known pirate contacts. Information that had previously been readily available through casual conversation in taverns now required careful cultivation of sources who faced severe penalties if discovered. Calico Jack's reputation, which had once opened doors throughout the Caribbean, now made him a marked man whose presence endangered anyone who assisted him. The Williams' need for supplies and maintenance created particular vulnerabilities during this period. Every visit to port for water, food, or repairs risked exposure to colonial authorities or naval forces. The vessel's distinctive appearance and her crew's reputation made concealment increasingly difficult, while the growing network of informants ensured that their presence would quickly become known to hostile forces. Calico Jack's efforts to address these challenges demonstrated his evolution from opportunistic raider to strategic leader capable of adapting to changing circumstances. He began to develop alternative supply networks based on remote islands and secluded harbors where the William could obtain necessities without exposing herself to capture. These arrangements required careful planning and substantial financial investment, reducing immediate profits while improving long-term survival prospects. The crew's morale during this difficult period reflected their confidence in their leaders and their shared commitment to their chosen profession. Despite increasing dangers and reduced profits, most of the William's sailors remained loyal to Calico Jack, Anne, and Mary. This loyalty was based not only on past successes, but also on their leaders' willingness to share dangers and hardships rather than seeking safety at their followers' expense. However, the strain of constant vigilance and reduced opportunities began to create fissures within the crew that threatened the unity essential for survival. Some sailors argued for more aggressive tactics that might restore their previous success levels, while others advocated for temporary retirement until conditions improved. These debates created tensions that required careful management to prevent the kind of divisions that could lead to mutiny or desertion. The winter months of 1721 brought temporary relief from some pressures as seasonal weather patterns reduced naval patrol activity and provided opportunities for the William to operate with somewhat less risk. However, the fundamental changes in the Caribbean political and economic environment continued to restrict pirate activities and increase the long-term threats to their survival. Calico Jack's strategic thinking during this period focused on developing exit strategies that might allow his crew to survive the transformation of Caribbean society from pirate-tolerant to pirate-hostile. Some pirates were accepting pardons offered by colonial governments, while others were retiring to remote locations where they could live quietly on accumulated wealth. A few were attempting to transition into legitimate maritime careers, using their skills in legal ventures. The relationship between Calico Jack, Anne Bonny, and Mary Read remained strong despite the increasing pressures they faced. Their shared commitment to each other and to their crew provided stability during a period when lesser partnerships might have fragmented under stress. Their combined skills and complementary capabilities continued to give the William advantages over both prey and predators, though these advantages were becoming increasingly marginal. As 1721 drew to a close, the William continued to sail Caribbean waters that were becoming steadily more hostile to her presence. The Golden Age of Caribbean piracy was ending, and even the most successful practitioners of the trade were finding their options increasingly limited by effective opposition from colonial and naval authorities. The stage was being set for confrontations that would test the courage, skill, and loyalty of all involved in ways that none of them could fully anticipate. The events that would ultimately lead to Calico Jack's downfall began in the early spring of 1722, when treachery entered the William's operations through sources that had previously been considered secure and trustworthy. The betrayal came not from enemies, but from within the pirate community itself, demonstrating how thoroughly the colonial anti-piracy campaign had corrupted the relationships and loyalties that had sustained Caribbean piracy for generations. The transformation of former allies into potential enemies reflected the success of colonial authorities in creating incentives for betrayal that exceeded the traditional bonds of pirate brotherhood. Substantial rewards were offered for information leading to the capture of notorious pirates, while pardons provided opportunities for lesser figures to escape prosecution by cooperating with government officials. These policies systematically undermined the trust that was essential for pirate operations. Calico Jack's first indication that something had changed came through subtle alterations in the behavior of contacts who had previously provided reliable intelligence and support. Conversations that had once been open and cooperative became guarded and suspicious. Information that had flowed freely was suddenly difficult to obtain. Most disturbing, several planned operations had to be abandoned when expected targets failed to appear or proved to be more heavily defended than anticipated. The source of these problems gradually became clear through careful investigation and the kind of patient detective work that Calico Jack had learned during his years as a quartermaster. Someone with intimate knowledge of the Williams operations was providing information to colonial authorities, enabling them to anticipate and counter pirate activities with devastating effectiveness. The betrayal was not random, but systematic, suggesting a well-placed informant with access to the crew's most sensitive plans. The psychological impact of this discovery on the Williams crew was profound and immediately dangerous. Pirates depended on mutual trust and loyalty to survive in a profession where betrayal meant death or capture. The knowledge that someone among them was selling information to their enemies created suspicion and paranoia that threatened to destroy the unity that had made them successful. Anne Bonny's reaction to the betrayal was characteristically fierce, advocating for immediate and violent action against anyone suspected of treachery. Her loyalty to Calico Jack and the crew was absolute, and she viewed the betrayal as a personal attack that demanded swift retribution. However, her emotional response, while understandable, also created additional tensions within a crew already strained by constant danger and reduced opportunities. Mary Read's approach to the crisis was more analytical, reflecting her experience with the kinds of political intrigue that characterized both legitimate maritime service and pirate operations. She understood that hasty accusations could be as dangerous as the betrayal itself, potentially destroying innocent crew members while failing to identify the actual informant. Her counsel for patience and careful investigation helped prevent precipitous actions that might have made the situation worse. The investigation into the source of betrayal required Calico Jack to employ all of his accumulated knowledge of human nature and pirate society. He had to identify the informant without alerting them to his suspicions, while also maintaining crew morale and operational effectiveness under increasingly difficult circumstances. The process was complicated by the possibility that multiple crew members might be involved, or that the betrayal might be coming from sources outside the William herself. The evidence gradually pointed toward specific individuals whose behavior and opportunities made them likely candidates for treachery. Financial pressures, personal grievances, or simple fear could motivate betrayal, and Calico Jack had to evaluate each crew member's circumstances and motivations without appearing to doubt their loyalty. This delicate investigation required skills that went far beyond traditional pirate capabilities. Meanwhile, the operational situation continued to deteriorate as colonial forces demonstrated increasingly detailed knowledge of the Williams' activities and intentions. Naval patrols appeared in locations where they should not have been expected, while merchant vessels that had seemed vulnerable proved to be well-defended traps designed to capture unwary pirates. The noose was tightening with each passing week. The climax of the betrayal came when a carefully planned operation against a supposedly valuable Spanish merchant vessel turned out to be an elaborate ambush orchestrated by colonial authorities with inside knowledge of the Williams' tactics and timing. Only Calico Jack's expertise in reading wind and weather conditions, combined with the superior sailing qualities of his vessel, enabled them to escape what would otherwise have been certain capture or destruction. This narrow escape confirmed that the betrayal was not only real, but immediately dangerous to everyone aboard the William. The informant had provided colonial authorities with detailed information about the crew's plans, capabilities, and intentions, enabling them to prepare countermeasures that came very close to succeeding. Further operations under these conditions would be suicidal, yet the crew's financial needs and professional commitments made complete inactivity impossible. Calico Jack's response to this crisis demonstrated both his growth as a leader and his understanding of the broader changes affecting Caribbean piracy. Rather than allowing anger and suspicion to destroy his crew, he focused on developing strategies that might allow them to survive despite the betrayal. This required fundamental changes in how they planned and executed operations, as well as modifications to their long-term objectives. The new operational procedures implemented by Calico Jack emphasized compartmentalized planning and reduced information sharing to limit the damage that any single informant could cause. Only the most trusted crew members were included in detailed planning sessions, while others received only the information necessary for their specific roles. This approach reduced operational flexibility, but provided better security against further betrayals. The psychological toll of operating under constant suspicion began to affect even the strongest members of the crew. The camaraderie and mutual trust that had characterized earlier periods was replaced by watchfulness and caution that made normal relationships difficult to maintain. Anne and Mary found themselves constantly evaluating the behavior and loyalty of crew members they had previously considered friends and reliable partners. The economic pressures created by reduced operational effectiveness were compounded by the need to invest additional resources in security measures and alternative supply networks. The Williams' expenses increased at the same time that income was declining, creating financial strains that threatened long-term sustainability. These pressures added to the crew's stress and made the temptation of colonial pardons and rewards more attractive to wavering crew members. The betrayal also had broader implications for the Caribbean pirate community as a whole. If someone with access to Calico Jack's operations was willing to cooperate with colonial authorities, similar betrayals were likely affecting other pirate crews throughout the region. The traditional bonds of pirate brotherhood were being systematically undermined by colonial policies designed to divide and conquer the pirate community. As spring turned to summer in 1722, the William continued to operate in Caribbean waters that had become increasingly hostile not only from external enemies, but also from internal treachery. The betrayal had fundamentally altered the dynamics of Calico Jack's operations, forcing adaptations that reduced both effectiveness and profitability while increasing stress and suspicion among the crew. The partnership between Calico Jack, Anne Bonny, and Mary Read remained strong, but even their relationship was tested by the constant pressure and uncertainty created by the knowledge that someone close to them was actively working for their enemies. Their loyalty to each other provided stability during this difficult period, but they were fighting not only external forces, but also the corrosive effects of betrayal from within their own ranks. The stage was set for the final confrontations that would determine whether Calico Jack and his remarkable crew could survive the combination of external pressure and internal treachery that was closing in around them. Their greatest test lay just ahead, and the outcome would depend not only on their courage and skill, but also on their ability to maintain unity and trust in circumstances designed to destroy both. October 1722 brought the crisis that Calico Jack had been anticipating and preparing for throughout the difficult months of betrayal and increasing colonial pressure. The final hunt began not with dramatic naval battles, but with a carefully orchestrated campaign of intelligence gathering, surveillance, and coordinated pursuit that demonstrated how thoroughly colonial authorities had learned to counter even the most sophisticated pirate operations. Captain Jonathan Barnett of the Royal Navy had been assigned specifically to capture Calico Jack and his crew, bringing to the task a combination of naval expertise, local knowledge, and determination that made him perhaps the most dangerous opponent the William had ever faced. Barnett understood that success would require more than superior firepower. It would demand patience, cunning, and the ability to anticipate his quarry's moves in waters where they held every apparent advantage. The intelligence network that supported Barnett's operation was extensive and sophisticated, incorporating both naval resources and civilian informants throughout the Caribbean. Colonial governments had finally learned to coordinate their anti-piracy efforts effectively, sharing information and resources in ways that created overlapping zones of surveillance that made pirate operations increasingly difficult and dangerous. Calico Jack's awareness of the intensifying pursuit came through the same intelligence sources that had previously served his operations so well. The difference now was that many of these sources were compromised or actively working for his enemies, creating a situation where information itself had become a weapon that could be used against him. Every contact carried the risk of exposure, while every operational decision had to be evaluated for potential betrayal. The Williams movements during this period reflected Calico Jack's growing understanding that traditional pirate tactics were no longer sufficient for survival. Instead of seeking rich prizes in well-traveled shipping lanes, he focused on evasion and concealment, using his intimate knowledge of Caribbean waters to stay ahead of pursuing forces while seeking opportunities to resupply and regroup. The crew's morale during these desperate weeks fluctuated between determination and despair as the reality of their situation became increasingly clear. The Golden Age of Caribbean piracy was ending, and even the most successful practitioners were finding their options limited by effective opposition and systematic betrayal. Some crew members began to advocate for seeking pardons or abandoning the pirate life entirely, while others insisted on fighting to the end, regardless of the odds. Bonny and Mary Rad provided crucial stability during this period of crisis, their courage and loyalty serving as examples that helped maintain crew cohesion when lesser leadership might have allowed the situation to deteriorate into panic or mutiny. Their willingness to share the dangers and hardships faced by the entire crew demonstrated the kind of commitment that inspired others to continue fighting despite overwhelming odds. The tactical situation facing the William was complicated by the seasonal weather patterns that affected Caribbean navigation during the autumn months. Hurricane season created both opportunities and dangers, with powerful storms capable of providing concealment from pursuing vessels while also threatening to destroy the William herself. Calico Jack's expertise in reading weather signs and his knowledge of secure anchorages became crucial for survival. Captain Barnett's pursuit strategy reflected his understanding of both pirate psychology and Caribbean geography. Rather than attempting to chase the William directly, he focused on controlling key locations and restricting her access to supplies and support. This approach gradually forced Calico Jack into increasingly desperate situations where his options were limited and his movements predictable. The final weeks of the chase became a deadly game of cat and mouse, with both sides demonstrating the skills and knowledge that had made them successful in their respective professions. Barnett's naval training and resources were matched against Calico Jack's intimate knowledge of local conditions and his crew's experience in unconventional warfare. The outcome would depend on which side could maintain their advantages while exploiting their opponent's weaknesses. The psychological pressure on the William's crew intensified as their situation became increasingly desperate. The constant vigilance required for survival was exhausting, while the knowledge that capture meant death or imprisonment created stress that affected judgment and performance. Calico Jack's leadership during this period was crucial in maintaining the morale and effectiveness necessary for continued resistance. The betrayal that had compromised so many pirate operations continued to haunt the William's movements, with Barnett demonstrating detailed knowledge of their capabilities and intentions that could only have come from inside sources. This situation forced Calico Jack to make operational decisions based on incomplete information, while assuming that any plans shared with the crew might quickly become known to his enemies. The economic pressures that had been building throughout the year reached crisis levels as the William's ability to capture prizes was reduced to almost nothing by the intensity of pursuit and surveillance. The crew's financial needs could no longer be met through piracy, creating additional incentives for desertion or betrayal that threatened to accelerate their downfall. As October progressed, the William found herself increasingly isolated and desperate, with Captain Barnett's forces closing in despite Calico Jack's best efforts at evasion and concealment. The superior resources and coordinated strategy of the colonial forces were gradually overwhelming even the most skillful pirate tactics, creating a situation where capture seemed inevitable unless something dramatic changed the balance of power. The relationship between Calico Jack, Bonny, and Mary Read during these final weeks demonstrated the strength of bonds forged through shared danger and mutual commitment. Despite the overwhelming odds and the apparent hopelessness of their situation, their loyalty to each other and to their crew remained unshaken. This unity provided the foundation for continued resistance even when rational calculation suggested that surrender might be preferable to certain destruction. The final confrontation was approaching rapidly as October drew to a close, with both sides preparing for the climactic encounter that would determine the fate of one of the most famous pirate crews in Caribbean history. The outcome would depend not only on courage and skill, but also on fortune and the complex interplay of factors that had been building throughout the months of pursuit and evasion. Captain Barnett's closing trap was carefully designed to eliminate the Williams' traditional advantages while maximizing the effectiveness of naval firepower and trained crews. The location and timing of the final encounter would be chosen to favor the pursuers, though Calico Jack's desperation and the exceptional qualities of his crew ensured that the battle would be neither easy nor predictable. The stage was set for the final chapter in the remarkable career of Calico Jack and his extraordinary crew. The Golden Age of Caribbean piracy was ending, and the fate of Bonny and Mary Read would be determined by events that none of them could fully control. Their courage, skill, and loyalty would be tested one final time in circumstances that would determine not only their survival, but also their place in the legends that would outlive them all. The capture of Calico Jack, Bonny, and Mary Read on November 20th, 1720, brought an end to one of the most remarkable pirate careers in Caribbean history, but it also began a legal drama that would capture the attention of colonial society and establish precedents that would influence maritime law for generations. The trial that followed their capture was as extraordinary as the lives that had led to it, involving legal questions, social tensions, and personal dramas that reflected the complex nature of both pirate society and colonial justice. The circumstances of their capture had been both sudden and complete, leaving no opportunity for the kind of dramatic last stand that might have been expected from such famous pirates. Captain Jonathan Barnett's carefully planned operation had caught the Williams crew off guard during a moment of relaxation, when their usual vigilance had been temporarily lowered by the consumption of alcohol and the false security of what they believed to be a safe anchorage. The immediate aftermath of the capture revealed the complex dynamics that had characterized the Williams crew. Most of the pirates offered little resistance once the hopelessness of their situation became clear, though Bonny and Mary Read continued to fight with characteristic ferocity even after Calico Jack and the majority of the crew had been subdued. Their courage in defeat added to the legends that would surround their names, while also demonstrating the exceptional qualities that had made them such valuable partners. The transportation of the prisoners to Spanish Town, Jamaica, for trial was itself a significant event that demonstrated the seriousness with which colonial authorities approached the prosecution of piracy. Spanish Town served as the capital of Jamaica and the seat of the island's colonial government, making it the natural venue for trials of such notorious criminals. The journey from their place of capture to the courthouse gave the prisoners time to contemplate their fate while providing colonial authorities with opportunities to gather additional evidence and prepare their case. The legal framework within which the trial would be conducted reflected the evolution of maritime law during the early 18th century. Piracy was considered one of the most serious crimes under both English common law and international maritime codes, carrying mandatory death sentences for those convicted. However, the specific circumstances of each case could influence both the conduct of trials and the severity of sentences, creating opportunities for skilled advocates to mitigate the consequences their clients faced. The courthouse in Spanish Town was a modest building that had witnessed numerous criminal trials during Jamaica's transformation from Spanish colony to English possession. But few cases had attracted the attention that surrounded the prosecution of Calico Jack and his crew. The presence of 2 women among the defendants was particularly sensational, since female pirates were extremely rare and their prosecution raised legal and social questions that had few precedents in colonial jurisprudence. Governor Nicholas Laws of Jamaica presided over the proceedings, bringing to the task a combination of legal knowledge, administrative experience, and political awareness that reflected the importance colonial authorities placed on the case. Laws understood that the trial was about more than simply punishing individual criminals. It was an opportunity to demonstrate colonial authority and deter future piracy through the visible application of justice. The charges against the defendants were comprehensive and detailed, encompassing numerous acts of piracy, robbery, and violence committed throughout the Caribbean during their years of operation. The prosecution had gathered testimony from victims, witnesses, and former crew members, creating a substantial body of evidence that documented the scope and impact of the Williams activities under Calico Jack's command. Calico Jack's behavior during the trial reflected his understanding that the outcome was predetermined by both the evidence against him and the political necessities that drove colonial anti-piracy efforts. His acceptance of responsibility for his actions was consistent with the pirate code of honor that valued courage and honesty even in defeat. He made no attempt to shift blame to subordinates or to claim that his actions had been justified by circumstances beyond his control. The testimony regarding Bonny and Mary Read created particular interest among court observers and colonial society more broadly. The details of their participation in pirate operations challenged conventional assumptions about women's capabilities and proper roles, while their courage and competence earned grudging respect even from those who condemned their choices. The legal questions surrounding their prosecution were complicated by both their gender and their exceptional circumstances. Mary Read's revelation of her pregnancy during the trial proceedings created additional complications for the court and demonstrated her continued ability to surprise those who thought they understood her character. The discovery that she was carrying a child raised legal questions about the appropriateness of executing a pregnant woman, while also providing potential grounds for delaying or commuting her sentence under legal precedents that protected unborn children. Anne Bonny's pregnancy, revealed shortly after Mary's announcement, created similar legal complications, while also raising questions about the relationships and personal dynamics that had characterized life aboard the William. The timing of both pregnancies suggested that they had occurred during the final months of the crew's operations, adding personal drama to an already sensational case. The legal arguments presented during the trial touched on broader questions about maritime law, colonial authority, and the nature of piracy itself. Defense attorneys attempted to distinguish between different types of maritime crimes, arguing that some of the defendants' actions might be classified as privateering rather than piracy if proper commissions could be demonstrated. However, these arguments were undermined by the systematic nature of the crew's operations and their attacks on vessels of all nationalities. The prosecution's case was strengthened by testimony from victims who had survived encounters with Calico Jack's crew, providing first-hand accounts of the violence and intimidation that had characterized their operations. These witnesses described not only the material losses they had suffered, but also the psychological trauma created by pirate attacks, helping to demonstrate the broader social impact of maritime crime. The testimony regarding the crew's democratic decision-making processes and the distribution of captured wealth provided insights into pirate society that fascinated court observers, while also supporting the prosecution's arguments about the systematic nature of their criminal enterprise. The evidence showed that the Williams operations had been carefully planned and executed rather than representing spontaneous acts of violence or desperation. The character witnesses who spoke on behalf of various defendants revealed the complex relationships and loyalties that had bound the crew together during their years of operation. Former shipmates described acts of loyalty, courage, and generosity that complicated the simple narrative of criminal behavior that the prosecution sought to establish. These testimonies highlighted the humanity of the defendants, while also demonstrating the attractions that had drawn them to pirate life. The court's deliberations reflected the complexity of the legal and social issues raised by the case. While the evidence of guilt was overwhelming and the legal penalties were clearly defined, the exceptional circumstances surrounding Anne Bonny and Mary Read created precedential questions that required careful consideration. The timing and conduct of the trial also reflected colonial authorities' awareness that the proceedings were being watched throughout the Caribbean as a test of colonial justice. The verdict, when it came, surprised no one who had followed the proceedings. Calico Jack and the male members of his crew were convicted of piracy and sentenced to death, with executions scheduled to follow quickly to demonstrate the swift application of colonial justice. The sentences reflected both the severity of their crimes and the deterrent effect that colonial authorities hoped to achieve through visible punishment. The separate proceedings regarding Anne Bonny and Mary Read reflected the unprecedented nature of their cases and the legal complications created by their pregnancies. The court's handling of their situations established precedents that would influence the treatment of female criminals in colonial jurisprudence, while also acknowledging the exceptional circumstances that had brought them before the bar of justice. The public reaction to the trial and its outcomes revealed the complex attitudes that colonial society held toward piracy and pirates. While official condemnation was universal and severe punishment was demanded, there was also fascination with the defendants' extraordinary lives and grudging admiration for their courage and loyalty. The proceedings had created legends that would outlive the individuals themselves, ensuring that their names would be remembered long after their crimes had been forgotten. As the trial concluded and the sentences were pronounced, the participants faced the final chapters of lives that had challenged conventional expectations and created stories that would inspire countless retellings. The legal proceedings had provided a formal conclusion to their pirate careers, while also establishing their place in the broader narrative of Caribbean history and the Golden Age of Piracy that was rapidly drawing to a close. The execution of Calico Jack on November 18, 1720, at Gallows Point in Port Royal, Jamaica, marked the end of one of the most colourful and influential careers in the history of Caribbean piracy. His body was displayed in a gibbet on a small island at the entrance to Kingston Harbour, a grim warning to other pirates and a symbol of colonial authorities' determination to eliminate maritime crime from Caribbean waters. Yet even in death, Jack Rackham's influence would continue to shape both the reality and mythology of piracy for centuries to come.